if those MPs remain sanctioned, then he wouldn't be allowed to or asked to, and they might do a similar timing like they did with Donald Trump, so Parliament wasn't sitting.
Keir Starmer has said that Xi Jinping would be welcome to visit the UK after their meeting in Beijing, which would be the first such trip for the Chinese leader in 11 years. The last time President Xi came to these shores, you may recall that he sunk a pint with David Cameron in his Buckinghamshire local. Now, it's a move that would cause controversy, as China has previously sanctioned 5 MPs and 2 members of the House of Lords. It comes after a positive meeting between Starmer and President Xi, with agreements on visa-free travel to China for up to 30 days, and import taxes will be cut on British whiskey. Here's Times Radio's political editor Anna Mikhailova, who is on the trip, speaking to John Pienaar on Drive.
This is being seen very much as a first step. They don't want the message to be that we're back to the golden era. The Starmer side don't want that. And they said privately that in his discussions with President Xi today, he made a distinction between areas of the British economy that he was happy for the Chinese to invest in and areas that wasn't open to them, which is obviously quite a big difference to the Cameron era. The Chinese see this almost as a test of the relationship. I mean, I really got the sense that, they've been pretty unhappy with the way that successive British governments have blown, as they put it, hot and cold.
Now let's speak to Humphrey Hawksley, who's author of Asian Waters and former BBC Beijing bureau chief. Good evening, Humphrey.
Evening, sir.
Thanks so much for joining us. What's your assessment of this trip and whether it's been a success for the Prime Minister by his own metrics and general metrics of UK and Chinese relations?
I think there's 2 sides to this, really. That's as you said in your introduction. Bit by bit, it's going to be seen here. He's going to be criticised. There's going to be criticism against Xi's invitation here and everything. But if you see this as a Chinese feast, as it were, this visit would be the aperitif. They are testing ground. They are having a few cocktails before they even have their starters. And the key element here is that Britain has to test and know what areas it can work with China and what areas it cannot. And over the past 20 years or so, it hasn't decided that. And that's why we've had a number of complete ructions on it. For example, in 2003, 20 odd years ago, British Telecom BT signed up Huawei for our mobile phone system. They've now been kicked off it. When Theresa May became Prime Minister, one of the first China things she did was call in the Chinese investment in Britain's nuclear power industry. That caused huge disputes between Britain and China. The Chinese were allowed to stay at the Hinkley Point reactor that's being built, but they were kicked out of Sizewell. And Chinese that I was dealing with at the moment, they were shaking their heads and they said there hasn't been an election. You're meant to be a democracy. It's the same ruling party yet you keep changing the rules. So I think that what's going to happen in this is, yes, we want Britain badly needs Chinese technology in climate change and wind farms, for example. We might be able to take the wind farm blades, but we're not going to take any of that mechanism that is remote controlled that they could tap into to get data.
So the fact, Humphrey, you call this an aperitif suggests this is not really the main course. And when we look at the 2 main announcements that have come out of the trip, one is 30 days visa-free travel. That's clearly a good thing. It means more British people can visit China, maybe more akin to going to America or Europe. And then there's been some reductions on tariffs, but it doesn't feel exactly as if there's been a big economic offering or even a big diplomatic offering. So what do you think comes next? Because, of course, Keir Starmer said that there may be a visit from President Xi to the UK. That would be a huge moment for the main course and maybe even a dessert and a drink or 2.
I think that might be the starter, because in the Chinese view, China looks in 10, 20, 30-year stages. And what it's trying to do in the long term here is to coax European countries away from the United States, and we're seeing, and then within Europe trying to play the Europeans off against each other. So we might be offered 30-day visa-free travel now, but the French and the Germans and the Italians, I think, already have it, along with the Australians and the Japanese. So we're playing catch up there. And you can be quite sure that another European prime minister will be there in a few months' time or in a month's time or so, and they will be offered something as well. And then there are the big investment deals. The AstraZeneca, for example, I think has promised $10.9 billion in the next 4 or 5 years investing in
the
China.
Pharmaceutical technology.
Yes, that's pharmaceutical technology, which is a very big thing. AstraZeneca are in there already, and they have research and development and manufacturing and sales in China. So that is something that already exists. And it's really, if we want to build up this relationship, going in for these very long-term investments. Rolls-Royce has been there for 30 years or so. Very big investment there, but then Rolls-Royce are in the defense industry, so we can only be in there, say, for aircraft engines.
Now, obviously, the economic side of it is what Keir Starmer has been focusing on. But from your experience of covering this, you will know, Humphrey, there's always been the question about values and in particular human rights. And we know that Keir Starmer did raise the case of the jailed democracy activist Jimmy Lai and the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, but we don't know if the latter was actually discussed in that. Do you think the Prime Minister got the right balance? Because you don't want to sink the economic side, but nor do you want to be entirely supine when it comes to our values versus China's values.
Well, our values have taken a hit, not least in the past month, with Donald Trump threatening to take Greenland, going into Venezuela. So we
not
really
quite the UK's values, we should say.
Well, the UK is seen as an ally of the US. So that's Western values, as it were. And of course, with what's happening in Minnesota and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a matter of leverage. And in the case of the Uyghur, you can say, well, we're not going to buy this such and such a product that is going to be made, or we're not going to invest in Xinjiang. That we can certainly say. In the case of Jimmy Lai, if the Chinese wanted to show this trip to be a huge success for Keir Starmer, and they know Keir Starmer's in trouble, here at home, as we hear often on Times Radio, they could release Jimmy Lai and put him on Keir Starmer's plane home. And then Keir Starmer would come home with a double victory. He would have reset relations with China, and he would have shown his human rights credentials in getting a political prisoner released.
And the other leg of this three-legged chair we're talking about here has to be the kind of security political element. And the fact is China has sanctioned 5 MPs and 2 members of the House of Lords. Is that something you'd imagine was discussed, or just put in the too difficult bucket, which does raise the question, Humphrey, if President Xi does visit the UK, as may now happen, would he be allowed to address Parliament?
Well, I would think that if those MPs remain sanctioned, then he wouldn't be allowed to or asked to, and they might do a similar timing like they did with Donald Trump, so Parliament wasn't sitting. And I think all these things can be negotiated on. I mean, there is this issue of the Chinese embassy, which Britain officially allowed them to build on the eve of Keir Starmer's trip. So that was a
no
big
coincidence that, perhaps.
No coincidence that at all. And these are things that we need to be more aware of. And I think Keir Starmer's trip is very good in this respect, is that, yes, they will be spying on us. They will be trying to steal our secrets. They will have the biggest embassy, which will be full of intelligence officials here. And as long as we know that, we can work out how to handle it. Is if we try to pretend it's not existing, as when the golden era happened and George Osborne went in and said we should join the Shanghai stock market, they should come in and build HS2 and all our nuclear power stations, which I referred to earlier. That's when the problems exist. And our intelligence services are one of the best in the world in knowing what's going on in China. And they flag that up all the time. The Foreign Office, on the other hand, and the Treasury, of course, are looking at the economic benefits. And it's a matter of getting a political balance between those two.
And finally, Humphrey, if we were to pull back the camera lens or microphone in this case, where do you see UK-China relations? Are they in the right place in your view? You know, is this right to take the pragmatic approach Keir Starmer is, or should he be a bit more sceptical than he's been? Because some of our listeners are getting in touch to question the fact that he's made a lot of this trip talking about how historic and important it is, and so far maybe hasn't got a lot in return.
Well, you're not going to get a lot in return immediately. We were talking about the aperitifs earlier on there,
Indeed.
but I think it needed a reset. And it also needed a definition of what sort of country China is. It's not Iraq, it's not Libya, it's not Syria, and Xi isn't one of those dictators. So I think that it's a good learning curve for the British voter to understand what China is and where it's going. And another issue that's come up during the Trump what Trump's been doing in the past month or two, is this element of democracy and authoritarianism. In Asia and the global south, authoritarianism is not seen as that much of a bad thing, whereas in Europe and the West, it is.
And that was Humphrey Hawksley, author of Asian Waters and the BBC's former Beijing bureau chief. And that bit he mentioned about China looking at things in decades or centuries, not just months and years, as sometimes we do in the West, I really think is the crucial point.